And just like that, another former Iowa State player commits to Penn State out of the transfer portal. And look, I'm all for it, but this team is hurting at pass rusher.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ikenna Ezeogu, that's who commits to Penn State out of the transfer portal. He's a defensive lineman, but not exactly what Penn State needs at this point. You are locked on to Penn State football in the transfer portal. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions a part of your day. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. As we are going to talk about Virginia Tech again, they officially land. Penn State's former quarterback in Ethan Grunkemeyer finally signs with Virginia Tech. We'll just rehash it again, right? Remaining portal needs for Penn State, I think it's obvious here. Pass rusher, edge defender. Well, they get an edge defender here, defensive lineman, and that is Ikenna Ezeogu from Iowa State. Ezeogu was somebody that I said, hey, Penn State needs to get him as a transfer from Iowa State. They need help at defensive line. But that was then, and this is now. I'll talk more about Ezeogu in just a second, but let me once again bring into the spotlight that Penn State needs defensive ends, particularly pass rushers. They need pass rushers. At this point in time, the confidence that I have in Penn State's pass rushers relies on three players right now. And that's Max Granville, Yvan Kemajou, and Alexander McPherson from Colorado out of the transfer portal. Do we count LeVar Arrington II? Because he hasn't announced his recommitment, but he's also the son of Penn State legacy LeVar Arrington. So they're right. I assume he's staying. I just, a commitment helps. One of those run it back graphics really does help in the situation, because I don't want to look silly if I start to project and say, hey, this is where Arrington would fit, because I think he is going to have to be one of those players that Penn State really banks on for this upcoming season. He would actually fit into that kind of role. I would say that he is more of a pass rusher than a stand-up linebacker. I would like to see him play on the edge of the defense instead of being back in the 3-3-5 or the 3-4, whatever it's going to look like. But day by day, I am more convinced that Penn State is going to have to run a 3-3-5, because they're solid at linebacker. They're really solid at defensive tackle or just larger defensive linemen, because that's what Ezeogu is. He adds more to that equation, and you don't have any edge rushers, really. And it is concerning, in my opinion, because, okay, Max Granville, all the talent in the world, you prioritize to get him back. He's still coming off of a season-ending injury. Kemajou is going into his second season. A lot of potential, but when you are the guy and you're not rotating in, and true freshman, you don't really have a lot of expectations. Now you are expected. Granville's the number one pass rusher here. And then it's Kemajou. And then after that, it's McPherson. I like all three of those players, but there really isn't a whole lot of depth at this point as far as guys who can just get after the quarterback. They got a ton of defensive linemen, a ton. Ezeogu now adds to that rotation. Okay. I should also mention Deshaun Burnett. I think that that's a disservice on my point that I didn't include Burnett. Still kind of the same thing. He takes the redshirt freshman season. We don't see a lot of him in action. How's he going to be in year two? So there's a lot of pressure here on the edge rushers. I'm guessing that D'Anton Lynn's going to blitz a ton, because you have an overload now at defensive tackle, at bigger, larger defensive linemen. And I think for the most part, Penn State fans are going to be okay with that, because the conversation was always defensive tackles just getting bullied. Penn State's defensive tackles getting bullied for the past few years. And part of that is a stigma, right? I guess Penn State fell back into that stigma in 2025. I think part of that had to do with Jim Knowles' defense because Zane Durant playing out of position, not playing to his true role, because in 2024, Zane Durant was one of the best players on that Penn State defense, and somehow he regressed. What changed, right? Penn State did a lot of things differently to help mask any uncertainties or any weaknesses at defensive tackle. Okay, when it came to size, when it came to depth, and it was Manny Diaz blitzing a ton. Tom Allen actually schemed it up very well, if you can believe that. He actually, really, Alonzo Ford and Zane Durant look completely different in 24 compared to 2025. Why is that? Because Tom Allen had a different approach for his defensive tackles, and Jim Knowles, well, he had a bad one. He had a bad one that put Durant and Ford in positions to not necessarily succeed. D'Anton Lynn is going to rely heavily on guys that are just going to plug the gaps. They are going to take on double teams, and they are going to free up, hopefully, Granville to make plays, Kemajou to make plays, Tony Rojas to make plays, any of those linebackers that they bring over from Iowa State. As far as Ezeogu and what he brings, he is an edge setter. He's going to stuff the run. He is not a highly productive pass rusher. So anybody that sees, oh, he's a defensive end, he's certainly a strong side defensive end, right? That's somebody, but he's basically, I would classify him as he's just a smaller defensive tackle, in my opinion. He's 6'5", 285 pounds. He's as athletic as he gets. Very active at the line of scrimmage in terms of, trying to bat the ball down. He's around the football, but he's not what Penn State needs at this point. And the conversation is different. So I like this move because it adds to the depth chart, right? You're getting somebody who was a starting caliber player, once again, from Iowa State. Someone who had production in terms of stopping the run. I don't want Penn State to get pushed around in the run game. Absolutely not. And you're just adding more resources to doing that. I still have to ask, when is enough, right? At that point. Still, I'm not going to say, oh, because Penn State loaded up at defensive tackle, they got their nose tackles, they got their defensive linemen, they're able to run these 3-4 fronts, a 3-3-5. They can actually do it because they now have the depth, or they can do it a little more successfully because they have the depth. I'm not going to turn away a commitment from another Iowa State player who is good in his own right, but he has a particular skill set that Penn State doesn't need as of right now. But still, the more the merrier here. Look, I know it sounds probably like, oh, Zach's kind of complaining here that they picked up a talented Iowa State player. Just, again, with what Penn State needs, the edge defender, the pass rusher spot still is highly questionable. And it's honestly the most questionable position group going into the season. D'Anton Lynn's going to have his work cut out for him. He's going to have to find ways to scheme around that, dial up some blitzes, right? Find ways to have the linebackers get involved in the pass rush. So I'm confident that Lynn has plans, but it is a little unsettling that I really only have confidence in 3 players and still kind of pending, okay, Burnett, Arrington, what are they going to do both in year 2 after a redshirt season? And again, that's assuming that Arrington is returning. I would like to think so, but as we saw, the portal can be confusing and a little distrustful at times, with players saying, hey, they're coming back, but they're also going to re-enter the portal, right? It's just kind of a certainty thing on my end. So now let's pivot and talk about some of the other remaining needs for Penn State in the transfer portal. Pass rusher is obvious, but what outside of pass rusher? Wide receiver. Okay, they got someone from Grambling State. That helps the depth chart. He's got upside. Still, I would like to see another pass catcher added. What about quarterback? Is Penn State still targeting quarterbacks out of the portal? They got 2. Are they looking for a third? That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like college football season. We all know that. The tailgates, the packed stadiums, being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets now, that part used to be frustrating. With long queues, logins, and prices, jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You can open up the Game Time app, look at upcoming college football games, upcoming games for any kind of sporting event. Choose your favorite team, and you'll be surprised how easy it is, how fast it is to find great seats. The app is incredibly easy to use. You can go from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes, and probably one of the best features, you get to see the view from your selected seats ahead of time. So there's no second guessing yourself. If you've never been to a venue or a stadium, this is a true game changer, getting to see your POV ahead of time. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets and sporting event tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Once again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Also, thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network out there. If you haven't already, go check out the all-new Everydayer Club. What is the Everydayer Club? It gives you more access to all your favorite shows here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You will get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Nittany Lions or any of your other favorite shows, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcasting app. We also get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. Go to LockedOnNittanyLions.supercast.com to learn more or tap the link down in the show notes. Remaining needs in the transfer portal. Pass rushers, obvious. I just spent the first segment talking about it. The remaining portal needs here include edge defender, yes. Pass rusher, if you will, because like I said, Ezeogu is an edge defender within this 3-3-5 system. 6'5", 290 pounds. So he's clearly not a pass rusher, but he is a larger defensive end that's going to rotate around across the line of scrimmage there. Anyway, the wide receiver spot. Okay, you get an addition in Keith Jones Jr. from Grambling State, and I like that addition because he resembles Jaden Higgins, and I've mentioned Jaden Higgins quite a bit. Higgins was basically unknown when he was a recruit. And 6'5", 200 pounds, insane athleticism, but clearly unpolished and needed to go somewhere else. That's kind of the same path that Keith Jones Jr. followed. And Noah Polley really, really spot on when it comes to identifying talent. So I'm going to trust this move because he checks all of the same boxes that Jaden Higgins did once upon a time, was a multi-year starter at Iowa State, and became that player that went from a 2-star high school recruit to a 3-star, still unknown transfer portal recruit to someone that eventually became the 34th overall selection in the NFL draft. I am not trying to say that Keith Jones Jr. follows that, but the evidence is there that maybe he could. And that's the idea. That's what they're going for is, hey, this guy resembles somebody that certainly panned out just a year ago. Let's try it again here. So the athleticism, being able to win at all three levels. So wide receiver, it's kind of like Ezeogu on the defensive line. Okay, that's great. It's a plus. It still doesn't solve everything, though. Wide receiver, fortunately for Penn State, I don't question the running back room. I'm not questioning the tight end room. My furthest concerns are away from the tight end room. Offensive line is in really good shape. So Penn State's going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to run 12 and 13 personnel. So is there even a need? Should they even chase after wide receivers? Well, yes, because you want playmakers. You need playmakers across the board because then teams are just going to sell out for the run. We saw how this went previously. There is precedent that, okay, well, your ground game might be great, but if there's no respect on the outside, then you just stack the box. And that was Penn State's kryptonite against better teams. You kind of got away with it for the most part up until you played Ohio State and Michigan and Notre Dame. And I don't mean to bring all of that up again, right? But to make my argument clear, you need to be able to have balance. Okay. Andrew Rapplier, Benjamin Bramer, and Gabe Burkle are all receiving threats. And you can work out of those situations. There is an element of surprise. But I'm still looking for more than just Chase Sowell and Brett Eskelson coming over from Iowa State and Kobe Howard. It's kind of the same thing at edge defender, pass rusher, right? It's mainly about pass rusher. Penn State has edge defenders technically, but pass rushers. Same thing here at wide receiver. Those are the three players that I immediately trust. After that, it's a lot of wait and see. It's a wait and see with Keith Jones Jr. if he's going to live up to any of those expectations. It's a wait and see for players like Karan Brookins, who I hear a lot of great things about, but he's only a redshirt freshman. How about Ben Whitver? Let's talk about the class of 2026. This is kind of the first time that I've really mentioned his name like this in conversation, but he's a recruit that I was questioning why Penn State didn't originally try to get him in the class of 2026 when it was the Franklin regime. And then Matt Campbell immediately says, we got to get this guy. And you do. So is a freshman like Whitver going to step up? In theory, maybe, but it goes back to the conversation that we had with Pat Kerbler just the other day. And you probably saw that episode, the Everydayers did. If you missed it, we really harped on the fact, okay, this portal group, this portal situation, I should say, you won with player retention from Penn State. You won with Iowa State additions. You did not win, or it's still to be determined, about your additions outside of Penn State retention and Iowa State additions. The players are intriguing. There's potential, but there's not a lot of plug and play and certainty with this group. Even someone like James Peoples, Brock Riker, it's a lot of projection in this case. How much are they going to contribute in their first season with Penn State? So wide receiver is still a need, not as much as pass rusher, because you did get, like I said, Jones Jr., however, missing on, and I didn't expect Penn State to get any of Mylan Graham or Quincy Porter. Ironically, they both went to Notre Dame. So that's that's something there. But what about a Noah Rogers, right? I feel like with him visiting, that's somebody that Penn State definitely should have tried to push for a commitment from, because then you have your core four. You're going to run a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. I understand that. But Rogers, Howard, Rogers committed to Alabama. So clearly he is still somebody worth bringing into a top-tier program. Rogers, Howard, Eskelson, Sowell, and then you add somebody like Jones Jr. That would have given me a ton more confidence here. But nevertheless, it's still the situation at hand. How about quarterback? Oh, Penn State got their starter in Rocco Becht for one season, and then Alex Mansky seems to be the starter in waiting, right? You still need to add competition in the room. I'm content with this quarterback room. Becht as the starter, Mansky as the immediate backup. Still, though, there is uncertainty here. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I don't want to lie and kind of and give a homer take and say, well, no, Mansky is guaranteed to be a star of the future. No, he's not. He's not. He's a former top 10 quarterback according to On3. But still, projection, expectation, what if? And then after that, you still need a depth chart. You don't want to just pass the baton immediately to Alex Mansky with any resistance. And maybe that's the confidence that, because that was, for the most part, I think the plan at Iowa State with Casey Evans, who's now at Penn State. He was factored in at Iowa State. The idea was to go from Becht to Mansky and maybe have Casey Evans push for him in his second season. But no, Penn State's still targeting quarterbacks, if you can believe that. One quarterback, and it's to create depth. You lost Jackson Smolik to Temple. Ethan Grunkemeyer has now officially signed with Virginia Tech, which we will talk about. Beckham Kritza went into the portal. Jack Lambert's staying, so that is a player that you at least have in the room, a veteran player. And then Casey Evans and Peyton Falzone. Still, Lambert, Falzone, and Evans should not be the next group of guys that you're turning to in 2026. If a worst-case scenario, Becht goes down, Mansky goes down, but also what if Mansky isn't ready in year two? He is a redshirt freshman. He doesn't have any real playing experience here at this level. So Penn State, according to On3, is targeting Connor Berry. Most people aren't going to recognize that name, and that's understandable because he's coming from the Division III level. So that's where Penn State is. It is difficult to recruit a true backup quarterback. I've been consistent with that the entire time. People who everydayers know on this show, refer back to that. I said, if you're going to keep Grunkemeyer, you're going to be constantly recruiting backup quarterbacks, and that's just tough to do. So what Penn State is doing is they've set up a visit with Connor Berry, who's out of Christopher Newport College from the Division III level. He's got experience, but not the experience that you would want. And he's really talented too, but with respect to Division III. This Penn State's going to be appealing to him, and it should be. I would expect Penn State to land this commitment here. You get the opportunity to find yourself as quarterback 2 at Penn State, and maybe even a quarterback competition the year after. And if things go well, we saw what happened with Trinidad Chambliss at Ole Miss. So I know that comparison might not be fair because we don't know much about Berry to this point, and Chambliss is kind of a one-hit wonder, right? And led Ole Miss to the semifinal. Still, Division III All-American, somebody who, yes, I would prefer Penn State to add to the roster, but it's a wait and see because you have to get them to take get them to take a backup quarterback spot. But that might be appealing here when things break in your favor, and then all of a sudden, Berry finds himself, if he is capable enough, on the football field. And that's it. The opportunity, right? It's the opportunity about being in the competition, being in the battle for QB2. I would still think Alex Mansky wins as a former top 10 recruit, according to On3, top 10 QB recruit in the nation. And with that being said, speaking of former top 10 QBs out of high school, Ethan Grunkemeyer was at Penn State. He leaves to go to Virginia Tech. It is official. He is signed. Virginia Tech, I'm still in the belief that I know they're optimistic for James Franklin and the Penn State players that they got for the most part. Still, with the way that things were initially projected, I'd be disappointed if I was a Virginia Tech fan. We'll discuss that more coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. All right, we'll wrap up with this. Ethan Grunkemeyer signs with Virginia Tech. Just interesting, the waiting game, right? Why'd he wait so long? Bryce Baker commits. I gave my 2 cents in the other show, how not that Grunk was necessarily scared off, but the same reason that he didn't stay at Penn State. Are you going into a quarterback competition? So I feel like the negotiations or the discussions had to be ongoing to figure out what is your place in this quarterback room. What is Bryce Baker bringing to the table? I think this would have happened instantly. I don't know that Virginia Tech was expecting a commitment from Bryce Baker so soon, but kudos to Virginia Tech. Kudos to James Franklin. I'm not going to waver on what I've said before about Grunkemeyer and how I still think he hasn't reached his full potential. I still think he can be a successful quarterback in the Big Ten, so that means he should be at least fairly successful at the ACC level, right? And he shouldn't be scared of any competition, whether that's with Bryce Baker or Troy Hune. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. He's a James Franklin guy, or else he would have gone somewhere else. Ty Howell being a brand new OC. I don't have a lot of expectations for Grunkemeyer in year 1 to necessarily take this big leap forward, though, because Ty Howell, right? Let's just point out some of the things that give me reservations here. Ty Howell is a first-time play caller. Okay, it is a relatively new setup at Virginia Tech, and as far as I'm concerned, Virginia Tech's wide receivers, pass catchers, are they good? I don't know. Maybe that's because I don't know much about them. I'm sure a Virginia Tech fan would be willing to educate me. But outside of Luke Reynolds, okay, how many star players or potential star players do you have that you're going to be able to rely on? So you have Grunkemeyer, you have Luke Reynolds, and overall, Just those two players alone, Virginia Tech fans should be ecstatic. However, when you look at it comprehensively, you can't just sweep under the rug what the initial expectations were. Oh, but that was just diehards or people that don't know what they're talking about. No, the chatter all along from the beginning was, well, how many starters are we going to get? And Tony Rojas is from Virginia, and Amari Campbell's from Virginia. And don't get me wrong, I will say I sat in this chair and said that, yeah, I'm kind of concerned because Virginia Tech could make a play. In Rojas's case, Miami made a play or could make a play here because there were rumors linking him to the Hurricanes. He ends up staying at Penn State, okay, right? But I just think about those initial conversations, the discourse about how Franklin was basically going to open up a pipeline to Virginia Tech. And you did get a dozen of the recruits. You did get, I guess, give or take now, a dozen plus of former Penn State players, but how many of them are game day ready? They're going to be stars or they're going to be serious contributors. I would say Grunkemeyer, Reynolds, and Keon Wiley. That's about it. It's still a wait and see type of thing. But the conversation went from, hey, we might get a star linebacker tandem with Campbell and Rojas. What about Xavier Gilliam? Maybe D'Anton Lynn, Kemajou. All those guys were loosely projected. Again, I know it's social media banter. I know it's message board commentary. I get it. I see it all, though. We all see it. But that was the optimism. And that's why I'm saying if those were the expectations going in and you end up with two players essentially out of the group of clear starters and star caliber players that would have been at Virginia Tech, I'd be disappointed. I would be. You didn't get any of those guys, any of them outside of Grunkemeyer and Reynolds. And I think those guys, I think those two will form an extremely reliable connection. I have no doubts about Reynolds as a receiver, as a pass catcher. The inconsistencies lie with his blocking, but if you don't have him do that often, Mike Gesicki succeeded a ton at Penn State because they used him as a jumbo wide receiver. They got him away from blocking too much. He got better. Reynolds will get better, but his talent lies in the passing game. Use him there. He's not a fullback. He's not a sixth offensive lineman. Use him the right way. And I imagine that Ty Howell will. And those players that Penn State did pick, or excuse me, the former Penn State players that did leave to go to Virginia Tech, I still think they can be good, but when will they be good? So I guess that's what Virginia Tech's going for there, is that you have a bunch of former 4-stars that you weren't necessarily getting originally. I understand that side of the conversation. I'm still saying I'm disappointed from Virginia Tech's perspective because the expectation was to get not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Guys that could fill out the offense and the defense for the most part. And you didn't get that from Penn State, or you didn't get the assistant coaches either. Anthony Poindexter, right? You got Danny O'Brien, you got Ty Howell, but you didn't get, so Poindexter, Drayton, Dion Barnes, Dan Connor, right? They were all supposed to follow to Virginia Tech. None of them. My 2 cents, and I know it'll go over well, especially with diehard Hokie fans. So welcome if you are here, if you're visiting. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I appreciate each and every one of you. I truly do. Whether you're here from the Penn State perspective, you're here from the outside perspective, you want to know my thoughts because everyone asked about Virginia Tech. I do appreciate you stopping by and joining me on this show. If you are new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all of your favorite Penn State sports teams. We do this daily here, Locked On Nittany Lions.